A lot of us love our bikes and we want to treat them as well as we can, but is super unleaded worth it over normal unleaded, or is that just a massive waste of money? I did 1,000 miles on normal unleaded and 1,000 miles on super unleaded so I could see what the difference was, so let's dive in and see the results. So typically there's going to be three major differences when you go from normal unleaded to super unleaded. The first is going to be E5 versus E10. Normal unleaded will typically be E10 fuel while super unleaded will be E5. Some petrol stations still have E5 on offer for normal unleaded, but most of them are E10 now. You can check the label on the pump to see what you're filling up with. I'm not going to dive too deep into the chemistry, but E10 fuel has more ethanol in it, which burns a little bit less efficiently and it can damage some older bikes. My particular bike is fine on E10, but you'll want to check yours. So the bike was perfectly happy starting up with a tank of E10, even in the cold when some older bikes might struggle, and even after the bike had been sitting for about a week or so. If I was leaving the bike stored for a long time, I would either drain the tank or fill it up with E5, since E10 can cause corrosion after a while. But if the bike sits for a week or so before I get to ride it, then I'm not worried at all. Some older bikes and even just some more high performance bikes might struggle a little bit, but in my case it was perfectly fine. But I was interested to see if I would get better miles per gallon on E5 since it supposedly burns a bit more efficiently. If that were true, then the extra cost of filling up with premium fuel would likely pay for itself. But I didn't notice a single extra mile to the gallon. I got the exact same mileage over 1,000 miles on E5 and on E10. On my bike I usually get around 66 miles to the gallon, which honestly I thought would be a little bit better than that, but still pretty good. So better fuel economy? Well, not in my case. An easier time starting my bike up on nicer fuel? Nope, the bike was still fine. So other than long-term storage, I didn't really seem to get much benefit out of using E5 fuel. The second biggest difference between super unleaded and normal unleaded is that super unleaded usually has a higher octane rating. This doesn't mean that your bike is just going to magically go faster with a higher octane fuel, but if you have a really high performance engine that's designed to run on higher octane fuel, then you're going to need to use that. And you'll be able to check your owner's manual to see what kind of fuel you need to put in your bike. It's a bit like drinking a protein shake if you don't actually go to the gym. Your body's not going to decide to suddenly grow more muscle just because you have some extra protein to use, and it will just be wasted. But for someone who goes to the gym regularly, the extra protein will be put to good use. So it's a bit like that for engines too. This is going to depend so heavily on your bike, but in terms of octane rating, my bike needs at least 91 octane fuel. Normal unleaded in the UK is 95 octane, which is already well in excess of what my bike needs, and super unleaded is around 97 octane. So I didn't expect my bike to be any faster on super unleaded since I was already exceeding the minimum by quite some way. And unsurprisingly, the performance of my bike was exactly the same on normal unleaded and super unleaded. I didn't have any problems running the 99 octane, but it didn't give me any benefits either. There was one exception though, and that's Shell V-Power. I'm not sure if it's just in my head since I've heard that V-Power is good fuel, but my bike did seem to be a little bit more responsive with that particular fuel, and it seemed to sound a little bit better too. But I'm 100% happy to admit that the bike was probably exactly the same, and I've just convinced myself that it felt faster. And finally, the third biggest difference is that super unleaded fuel has additives in it, which supposedly clean out your bike's fuel system, and they can reduce carbon buildup. Whether you'll notice that in the short term is really hard to say, but it might do some good for your bike over the long term. I can't see inside my engine to see if the additives were doing any good work. My bike didn't necessarily feel any smoother or nicer to ride with premium fuel, so I'll just have to trust the claims from the fuel companies. My bike is also pretty new, so it's not like there's years and years of carbon buildup to clean out, so on an older bike maybe you'll notice a benefit for this. I personally didn't. I found that super unleaded usually cost me around 20p a litre more than normal unleaded. With my 14 litre tank, that's around £2.80 a tank extra for good fuel. It's not going to break the bank every now and then, but if you're filling up a couple times a week, you want to know if it's worth the extra money or not. So after a 2,000 mile test, here are my conclusions. For my particular bike, I'm going to save myself a bit of money and just fill it up with normal cheap unleaded. If I happen to be filling up at a Shell petrol station, I'll splash out every now and then on a tank of super unleaded, to hopefully flush a bit of build up out my fuel system. And also just to treat the bike to something nice. She works hard, so she deserves it. This really is going to be bike dependent though, and some people are going to notice huge differences between normal unleaded and super unleaded. So quite literally, your mileage may vary. Have you guys noticed any differences, and what fuel do you use? Safe riding, and I'll see you in the next one.